Good morning, everyone. Paul, great to be with you.
Well, thanks for having us, John. I appreciate everybody being here.
This is a fantastic assemblage and a great summit. I want to start with the customer and work our way back. Often in conversations about the EV transformation, the customer isn't featured. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about what the automotive market looks like in the United States in 2024. What's your forecast? How do you feel about sales? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you decided to start here because everything does start with the customer. And, certainly without the customer, there's nothing here for us. There's nothing here for everybody out there, too. So I think when you look at the customer over the last few years, it's been remarkably resilient. Many prognosticators have felt like it was going to drop off, demand wasn't going to be maintained at these levels, and even in the face of some higher pricing that we've seen as a result of inflation, the customer has been remarkably resilient over that time period. And as a result of that, we've been able to continue to invest in our products, both ICE and EV. ICE is doing extraordinarily well right now, and that's critically important even as we're going through this transition, because as we've said before, that's funding the journey, right? Without the cash flows from ICE, all of the self-investment that we're making to make this EV transition is critical. And while we've seen some choppiness in the EV adoption space, I've often said, I ask hundreds of people what they say EV adoption is going to look like. Some people will draw a linear line, some of them will draw exponential curves. But the one thing they have in common is they're all smooth. And I always tell them it's never going to look smooth, it's going to look like this. And we're in one of those modes right now where we've seen growth in EV adoption slow down, but it's still growing. And I think a lot of that gets lost in the narrative, whether we're talking to the capital markets or the media, et cetera. That gets lost in the narrative. But their EV consideration is at an all-time high. And while there are some legitimate concerns about the path that we're going down in terms of charging stations, access, et cetera, we're bringing products that are customer-centered, and we believe that that will be successful over the long term.
Yeah, fantastic. There's two thoughts you laid out that I want to drill into a little bit more. First, or second, and then I'll come back to the first, is the EV market and the spikiness or choppiness, as you said. Yeah, I've seen headlines, EV sales going down, EV sales cratering, right? So what you're suggesting is there's a bit of a slowing of the growth rate, right? We've had a tremendous growth rate in the United States of EVs over the last couple of years. And so why do you think that is? I mean, is it expected? Are we shifting from maybe early adopters to a different set of consumers? What drives the spikiness in your view?
Well, again, I think, first of all, before we talk about what people are buying, EV consideration has gone up, and it's gone up pretty consistently as people learn more about it. So a big part of what we're doing is an educational campaign of not only telling people how much we're investing in charging, how we're partnering at the local level, how we're partnering at the interstate level for road trip charging, et cetera. Answering a lot of those questions is what's going to help people get over the hump. But I also think a proliferation of more EVs, my neighbor getting one, and I see what it's capable of, and I see that many of the fears I have aren't as unfounded. I've got an EV, I've got a charger in my garage, I love it, even for doing medium-sized road trips. So it's something that I think is going to continue to gel. But as we know, consumers are fickle sometimes, and that's okay. That's a good thing. We need to respond to that by answering their concerns and by surprising and delighting them with our products.
So when we talk about EVs, there's a broad category of vehicles and technologies we talk about. We talk about battery electric vehicles, right? So this is a vehicle that runs solely on an electric motor powered through energy from a battery. There's hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which is an electric vehicle that generates power on board. We also have electrified vehicles, things like plug-in hybrids. With regard to what we're seeing in the market, continued growth into and battery electric vehicles into other segments, how do you see the plug-in hybrid question playing out in this marketplace? The idea that you could have a vehicle with a fairly large battery but has an electric an internal combustion engine that would help power the vehicle. What's your sense about that?
Well, we've seen some recent success in plug-in hybrids across the industry, particularly here in the U.S. They've, had varying levels of success internationally, including some products that we have as well. So I look at plug-in hybrids as a very valuable tool to have in the kit, both in terms of complying with regulatory requirements, but also importantly from helping to serve as a bridge product for consumers that may be unsure about what that is, and having the security of a gas tank combined with the electric vehicle. So I think it's important that we meet the customer where they are. Some people are ready to jump all in on EVs. We saw a lot of that. Some people are going to be more skeptical, and some people are downright concerned or going to be very slow adopters. But hybrids are going to be an opportunity for us to dip your toe in the water across the board. So it's something that we see as a valuable tool to have in our kit.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, so the second piece that I wanted to drill down on what you opened with is the idea of funding this transformation. So General Motors has been around forever, at least in my mind, certainly longer than my lifetime. You started out as an internal combustion engine company. You're now moving into this new world, this EV world. What does it mean to be, to fund that transition? How does it work inside of General Motors?
Well, it's incredibly complex. I don't think I'm telling you anything that people don't know, and it's been an incredible challenge. We have varying product cycles. Some take longer than others, but the one thing that we know is we're running an incredibly successful company while we're also creating a growth company inside it, with that new EV infrastructure. So building cell plants, partnering across all levels of vertical integration, building manufacturing facilities as well. And we're doing this at the same time the company has been performing incredibly well. And that's the capital formation that's allowed us to make these investments. Now, a lot of those investments have slowed down alongside with where we've seen demand. What hasn't changed is the resolve in the bigger picture of where we know it has to go, but we have to regulate and meter out the pace at how we're making that transition. So I think the team has adjusted well, and we stress being nimble in the organization because we know this thing's going to change 100 times between now and 2035 and beyond. We just need to be there to meet the customer where they are.
Yeah, fantastic. And when I hear you say nimble, and I think about just in my own experience in the industry, the enormous scale, that's a challenge. You mentioned sort of the industrial base, so let's work our way up the supply chain, if you will. So what I hear you saying is we have to transform the entire automotive industrial base, right, from an internal combustion engine industrial base to an EV industrial base. So what's the GM strategy there? How do you look at your supply chain from battery packs and cells all the way up the supply chain? How far back do you look?
Yeah, what I would say is we have gotten far more vertically oriented than any time in the past. I mean, if you look at the history, it went from owning everything to owning nothing to now having to cooperate at all levels across. And, we've got a very capable supplier base. But as we're thinking about what are all those raw materials going all the way back to the extraction or the mining of it, how are we going to make sure that we have a seat at that table to understand where expansion projects are? So we've been pretty successful, and I'm really proud of what the team has done in terms of actually going out and finding those opportunities for us to help seed people that are starting up in a way to expand lithium or nickel or processing capabilities. And we've tried to be very, very creative about what we can bring to the puzzle because it helps to solve our needs about security of supply and making sure that we can have regular supply at consistent pricing across the board through this journey.
Mm-hmm. Some of those potential partners or partners might be in this room, right? These are companies that you're looking broadly across the supply chain. Help me understand sort of, again, as an observer, there appears to be a fair amount of price volatility with regard to the raw materials and critical minerals that you're looking at. How do you account for that, and how do you build that into your strategy? Where are we going with this?
Well, I mean, volatility has been incredible, especially when you're looking at across the battery raw materials complex, but we're no stranger to that. I mean, if you look at the last few years with COVID, semiconductor shortages, logistics challenges, et cetera, we've dealt with a lot of it. So, I think for an organization, you've got to keep your head down. You got to stay focused, not worry about those short-term fluctuations. But you've got to be able to see through that and understand the strategy of what are all these inputs. Because the volatility, as much as it affects us, it also affects the producers. So if you look at lithium, for example, everybody was happy to fund lithium projects at $70,000 a ton. There aren't quite as many people that are happy about funding it at $13,000 or $15,000 a ton. We've been there the whole time. And that's what I would say to the partners that are out there. Thank you for your support and your trust in us. For those potential partners out there, our door is open. I think we have the ability to think really creatively about these solutions to partner together, because we want our suppliers to be successful. Trying to get the best deal you can at the expense of your suppliers is a really good short-term strategy. It's not going to win you any long-term value creation contest.
Right. There's been some conversation already here at the conference, and we heard it a little bit as we were backstage getting ready to come on, dynamics about control of the supply chain and what's happening sort of, in other parts of the world. So where are the gaps with regard to domestic investment and industry needs? So like when you look at this and you're building a supply chain, obviously you're a global company, but you're looking certainly to support your U.S. production with a U.S. supply chain. Where are the gaps, whether they're resource gaps or investment gaps here in the U.S. supply chain?
Well, I would say that the number one investment gap that we've got to fill right now is processing, particularly around lithium and nickel. So, we've done a good job of securing supply, but the processing capabilities across the world are pretty limited and fairly concentrated. So that's something that we're working on. I mean, we've seen competitors take on, lithium processing by themselves, and they have a lower cost capital. They can do things like that. We need to find partners that we can execute with, because we can bring capital to the table. It's very patient capital, and partnering with those that have expertise and the ability to scale up in that is going to be a big answer to that question. But it's something that we are very focused on right now.
Let's broaden the aperture a little bit more. It's no surprise to anybody here or anybody in the world that when we look at the EV supply chain and processing, for example, of raw materials associated with the battery and components even going into the electric motors, that China is a dominant player. How do we think about engaging with other partners around the world? And we hear terms like friendshoring, nearshoring, onshoring. What's the GM strategy, and how do you think broadly about those types of developments as you're looking across the globe?
Well, it's something that I think the team has done a really good job of. When you look at what we've done with Korea, our partnerships with POSCO, with LG, with Samsung, really, really incredible, powerful alliances that we're building that are focused on great capital deployment. So we've deployed, the CAM facility in Canada. We've got battery plants in Ohio and Michigan. We're doing lithium extraction with companies in Nevada and California. And whether it's Korea or it's Australia or what we're doing in Brazil, there's a lot of opportunities to bring that together in more efficient, more sort of vertically integrated is probably the wrong term, but vertically integrated way where we're all vested in the success from birth to final product. And that's worked really, really well for us. And we think there's more to come.
One of the ways to kind of keep score about that from a customer perspective is, the ability for a vehicle to qualify for federal tax credits associated with the purchase of an electric vehicle. We have a very complicated law called the Inflation Reduction Act, which everybody here knows all about. But
I've heard of it.
There's there are content provisions in there, and so a good indication of, to my mind, or a simplified indication of the idea of independence from China or nearshoring or friendshoring is whether you qualify for the full credit. And what I thought I saw in recent announcements is that you're there with the products that are in the market or coming into the market today. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm very pleased with the team, and even as we've seen some changes to it as the details get ironed out, we've been able to adjust very quickly. So going back to being nimble, but this is something that we actually started in earnest long before the IRA was there. And what I would say is, when you looked at the effects that the pandemic had across global logistics, we were out there trying to de-risk some of that supply chain, because we found that even things in regions that weren't affected by COVID, the shipments on the water were, right? Or the shipments through the air, et cetera. So what we found is, how do we bring a much more diversified approach? And what we found is much of that actually lined up with the way the IRA was written. So when it was written, we had a little pivot. We didn't have to change directions, and that was really beneficial. And I think it's gotten us off to a good start. But it's also, how quickly can we adjust? We went through a period for, probably about 60 days, about 20,000 vehicles that didn't qualify. But back to your original question, that's irrelevant to the customer.
Right.
Right. And we have to stand behind that. So the sooner that we can adjust, the more nimble we can be, the better we can be in a consistent way for our customer across the board. Because I think that's one of the things that contributes to changes in demand, is if the customer doesn't understand what are the incentives available, what vehicles does it apply to, et cetera, the customer doesn't really know how to process that and says, I don't want to deal with that. I'm just going to go with what I know. So for us, being there for the customer so that we have a very consistent face, taking the risk on ourselves, and then adjusting the supply chain, adjusting the manufacturing to make sure that we can comply with it, that's our responsibility.
Yeah. This is a bit of a maybe an obvious question for folks here who are so small I and capital I invested in EVs and EV supply chains. But, we've been talking about the customer. It probably bears focusing on the vehicle a little bit and the benefits that the vehicle provides to the customer. This is a vehicle that is fun to drive, that's got great, sort of driving attributes, right? I mean, is that what you're hearing from your customers with regard to, those who have already purchased?
Yeah, so we've been hard at work really for about 4 or 5 years creating this Ultium platform. And, we've had some challenges scaling it. I think most of those are behind us. We've said that we're going to have 200,000 to 300,000 Ultium product vehicles out there. And we think it brings a new level of performance and a new level of capabilities to the customers that maybe for some of the vehicles that came to market quickly don't have. So that's not up to us to tell the customers, it's up to customers to tell each other. And what we've got to do is execute and get them in people's hands. And the team is doing a really good job recovering from some of the challenges we had last year. And I think that's going to win. And ultimately, what we've got to do is get people talking about our vehicles in ways that are very positive, and we think we've got the product to be able to do that.
It's very exciting. I want to, just as we're getting ready to finish up, I want to come back to, the broader look at the industry, both on the supply side as well as on the demand side. General Motors is leading this transformation. Other companies are invested in leading the transformation. The question I have for you is, how do we think about the role of policy and the government as it relates to the work that you're doing at General Motors? Where are the synergies? Where are the opportunities for that collaboration to be successful?
Well, I often say that as a chief financial officer, part of my job is to marry the aspirational with the practical and the pragmatic. And the reality is we exist in a world where capital needs to generate returns across the board. And in areas where there are codependencies like electric vehicles and charging network, that's an area where I think we can have public-private partnership in a way that's really meaningful. Because if you look at capital formation, capital isn't going to be attracted in earnest to charging networks until there's a proliferation of EVs out on the road. There's not going to be a proliferation of EVs until we invest in the charging network. So how do you kickstart that and make sure that at the end of the day, all of these things are developing together? So I think when you look at the IRA, when you look at the infrastructure to build chargers, we're doing that ourselves, investing in local communities, investing on highway charging, et cetera. That's an area where you can create bridges from here to there with the practical side, and still actually probably generate some decent returns for those public entities that are funding that across the board. So it's really about seeking those opportunities where capital is either not going to run to the solution right away, or needs to see a couple of proof points out there when it marries up with policy.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one. We got all sorts of time. Oh, okay. We're going to keep going, I guess.
Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep.
Assuming our customers.
Yeah,
want to.
I know we're sitting between you and lunch, so I'm trying to be respectful of your hunger pangs as well. But the clock finally went on, and it looks like we have a few more minutes. Let's stick with the policy thing a little bit. But by the way, for those of you who are wondering if we're going to talk about regulations, we're not. We're not going there. Just broader policy as we think about the framework that you've laid out. We're operating in a significant global environment of global flux, maybe I'll say. And so, how does that affect how you're planning, right? So we've got a world that is maybe a little bit less of a globally cooperative world, and maybe a little bit more of a globally competitive world. Does that change your outlook in any way in terms of your supply chain strategies and your engagements around the world?
I don't think it materially changes anything. I think, number one, we need to meet the customer where they are, and we've got quite the diverse product portfolio that serves many countries across the globe, and many very, very successfully. When you look at our market share and what we've been able to do, you look at what the team's done in South America, it's a multi-billion-dollar turnaround that we've seen there over the last few years by providing customers with products that they want. The other overriding theme, in any highly competitive industry is we got to keep our costs down. So we've been streamlining on the administrative side. We've been streamlining most we can around engineering, trying to get simplicity initiatives in place to really reduce the amount of variability in the business and all the costs that come with it. And that way we're able to redeploy that in the investments that directly impact the customer and ultimately make better vehicles at a lower cost. And that theme's been true 100 years ago, and it's just as true today, and it'll be true 100 years from now, is to make sure that we can provide the best product possible at a affordable price where the customer sees value. Yeah. And that won't change.
Yeah. For some of us who have been around the industry, it is still about satisfying the customer and also driving cost, right? Give us a sense of the scale of this transformation. The type of numbers that you talk about as the CFO of General Motors are big. And so from a broader industry perspective, are we talking about billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions? what type of scale are we talking about with regard to the transformation of the industrial base?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on how you define industry. I mean, if you're just looking at the assembly and the manufacturing industry, it's clearly hundreds of billions of dollars across the globe that needs to be done. I mean, that number goes up pretty exponentially when you look about charging infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, and a number of other things that we've got to do. So this is no small feat. We've got a small but important piece of that overall puzzle, and one that we need to execute well for our customers and for our shareholders who are rightfully demanding a return for the investment that they're making in GM. So making sure that we create that balance and also that ability to be nimble through all those changes, because like we said, it is going to be incredibly variable, but we've got to adapt quickly, and we can speed things up, we can slow things down as we've done that to, like I said, meet the customer where they are, and that's the way we're going to be successful through it. And over the last couple of years, the GM team's done an incredible job generating record levels of cash flow, which is helping to fund this journey while also making sure that shareholders are getting a return on the investment, because they're a very important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, no question about that. Let's end with vehicles. You're in the vehicle business and surprising and delighting customers. What's exciting in the product portfolio in the EV space? What are you driving now, perhaps, or what's got you really excited about what's in the marketplace today or about to come out?
Well, for the last year or so, I've been driving a Hummer EV, and I absolutely love it. It is a great vehicle. I was driving through a torrential downpour just last week, and the vehicle just handled very, very well. And that was incredible. And that was 150-mile trip. So it was good. It handles the range capabilities and does everything that I need it to be. I'm really excited about the breadth of vehicles that we can bring. So we've got the Hummer and the Cadillac Lyriq out. We'll be coming out later with the Escalade IQ. We've got the Chevy Blazer. We've got the next generation Chevy Bolt. So when you look across all of the consumer demographics in terms of what people want to spend and what they're looking for, the Ultium platform allows us to be able to deliver that at a cross-section that many people can't. Others are trying to pursue. And as we execute that, I think we're going to see tremendous success.
Excellent. Well, Paul, thank you very much for being here and sharing some of your thoughts about GM strategy, the product, and the customer. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work that the team is doing.
Thank you.